Hello. So for my interview project presentation, I elected to interview my sister Joey, and she is a neuropsychologist at Northeastern Neuropsychology in Cheshire, Connecticut, which is actually my hometown, and it's also where I'm going to be completing my internship this coming summer. So I'm really excited, and it was really nice to be able to connect with her and kind of learn about her day. So a little bit about Joey. She studied neuropsychology at Penn State University and then moved on to do an online graduate program with Purdue University before learning her first in-office job position. And so Joey's workday kind of consists of talking with, studying, diagnosing, and developing different treatment plans for people who have all different types of mental disorders, but most notably, people who have experienced trauma and have PTSD or other impacts as a result. So some of her patients have or are veterans with PTSD, but she also works with a good amount of people who have experienced developmental trauma. So she's seen type 1 trauma and a little bit of developmental trauma too. So she has a little bit of expertise in both. Overall, she really enjoys what she does, and she finds a lot of fascination in learning about how the mind operates after being exposed to different levels and sorts of trauma. She particularly likes working to kind of slowly build a connection with her patients and helping them realize that recovery is possible, and that it can be achieved. She told me that sometimes they have a negative attitude toward this, which is definitely understandable because of their trust issues, but she stays persistent regardless. So the first question that I asked her is, what's most important about working with trauma victims? And in my mind, I had kind of come up with an answer, and I assumed that it was going to have to deal with trust and safety a little bit, and lo and behold, I was right. According to her, establishing a safe and emotionally and physically safe and trusted environment or relationship with the patient is really key, as well as being super understanding if the person's uneasy or isn't yet comfortable with the connection that's being made. This is because trauma victims often have difficulty feeling safe with new connections. This is due to hypervigilance or lingering trust issues from the experienced trauma that they've had. And so another thing that she finds to be really important is maintaining a friendly, outgoing, and non-judgmental demeanor. Even if the patient can kind of come across as rude or isn't receiving of the help being offered, it's really essential to kind of maintain that positive demeanor because it gives the person the opportunity to work on trusting and building the connection. So understanding that their brain is wired to be on edge and a little wary is vital, and sometimes it can be kind of hard to maintain a positive attitude and willingness to help due to patient outbursts, lack of communication, things like that. Not being willing to open up and talk about the trauma. Sometimes that can be a little bit hard. And what she learned is that you can't really take it personally because it's kind of a natural effect of trauma. And that was really difficult for her at first, which I can definitely imagine. I'm sure if I had patients that were having outbursts at me and were feeling upset with my approach, I would definitely kind of take it out on myself. So I definitely understand where she's coming from in that. Excuse me. Another thing that she finds to be important is allowing the person to dictate the speed of the recovery process. And that's really important because rushing it can worsen the symptoms that they experience, and that ultimately makes it harder to assist them. And so understanding that trauma or understanding of what trauma is and its impacts is really crucial. And sometimes it can be a little frustrating to work with their patients, but understanding that their cognition, behavior, emotions, memory, concentration, executive functioning, that can all kind of be impacted by trauma. And so patience and understanding is really important, and trauma can look different from person to person. So taking the individualized approach is really important for Joey to help them, and it's kind of all in their best interest. So the next question that I asked her was, what's missing in trauma research literature? And so in her words, there could definitely be more research on trauma relative to neurodivergence. And so that basically means understanding and learning how trauma impacts and operates with people who have autism, ADD, ADHD, or other type of neurological conditions. And she really believes that there's a hole in this area, which is surprising given that that they would handle trauma a little bit differently because of the ways that their brain is different. And so these neurological conditions are fairly prominent, and so she believes that there's kind of a hole in that in the research there. Another thing that is definitely interesting is that she believes that there could be more research done in trauma in animals. And so the example that she used was neglected or abused dogs. And she finds that or I guess really anyone can kind of think, when you meet a dog that's experienced abuse or trauma, they have a lot of problems with trust, and it kind of rings true with humans too. So you can kind of learn about people through learning about trauma in animals. So she thinks that there should definitely be a little bit more research there. It's really interesting to see the power and the reality of trauma and how it's on a neurological level, not just in humans but in animals too. The last thing that she had mentioned here was that there could be more research in trauma that's linked to cyberbullying, or exposure to violence on the internet, etc. She thinks that that lacks credible research, and it kind of causes neuropsychologists like herself to essentially conduct her own research and find her own methods to see what the best care methods are for them. And these people have experienced this is still trauma, and so that she has to work around ways to kind of crack into their head and better them. So the last question that I asked Joey is, how does spirituality support traumatized? Or sorry, this isn't the last question, but the next question that I asked her was, how does spirituality support traumatized individual? And she had a lot to say about this one because she uses a lot of mindfulness practices in her work. So she's a major believer in therapeutic spirituality when treating trauma victims because it helps her patients find meaning and purpose, not only in their own existence, but with their personal traumas too. And so she often practices mindfulness and grounding exercises. Now, this could look like meditation or prayers or breathing exercises, things like that. And it's really important because it provides our patients a spiritual connection, and this kind of works better on some patients than other. But the goal is for them to ultimately gain understanding of why people experience pain and emotional damage and suffering and struggle, and having an understanding of that actually works to reduce some of the negative feelings that they feel, such as self-doubt and hopelessness. And it ultimately helps them find peace in themselves, which I find to be really interesting. And so in some cases, spirituality means connecting with God, uh, and or their version of God, whatever it may be, and finding a sense of belonging despite the trauma that's kind of glued them to the chair. Um, And Joey believes that trusting and believing in a higher power is really beneficial and is essentially framework for learning how to trust your peers as well. She finds this to be really helpful for her patients. This can kind of provide them comfort, which allows them to reduce feelings or tendencies like isolation, loneliness, or withdrawal from reality. And so something that she kind of focuses on is allowing the patient to get in touch with himself. And this is either with himself or a religious figure, and that's in an attempt to kind of free them of the burden of always trying to control the uncontrollable. When you have a brain that's constantly in fight, flight, or freeze mode, you're always kind of trying to look to control your surroundings, even though that's not the reality. Um, and so trying to kind of boil that down a little bit is really important for her. And so the last question that I had asked my sister is, how do you navigate a burnout as a neuropsychologist? And she was super transparent in the fact that burnouts do happen pretty frequently in this. Um, and so as that's kind of as a result of high stress and frustration that comes naturally with being a neuropsychologist. Um, this can stem from sometimes patients can seem rude or appear rude and have difficulty accepting her help or being willing to comply, but she knows that this is indicative of their trauma, not their character. And so that's a really important thing for her to understand. In terms of trauma victim related burnout specifically, Joey told me that the first step is to recognize the first signs of burnout. And so she said that this could look like a bunch of different things. For her, it could be like an increased level of irritability, decreased empathy for her patients, becoming emotionally drained a little bit faster, or even just dreading seeing or having interactions with trauma victims, either before, or after, or during sessions. And so after noting the burnout, she explained that there's a number of different ways to go about it so she can be the best as she can be for her patients. And so examples of the methods that Joey uses are, using different mindful practices, which is ironic because she uses this with her patients as well. But so this could look like meditating, breathing exercises, journaling, which I know she does a lot of. I see her doing that a good amount, and even yoga. And so this helps her reconnect with her purpose and allows her to kind of calm her nerves down a little bit and get in touch with herself after experiencing great deals of stress and frustration and the different emotions that come with it too. So focusing on the positive impacts of her profession rather than the difficult challenges that she faces also kind of helps her get back in touch with her purpose. And it's really important to understand that trauma recovery is a very big process and it requires a lot of patience and is ultimately the patient's journey to undergo, not necessarily hers to fix, despite really wanting to get them out of that bad place. She's going to do everything that she can do to help them, but ultimately, it is their journey to go through. So that's a really big understanding, and that kind of helps her bring peace with herself when she's feeling a little bit burnt out. Another big one, this is probably a little bit obvious, but still important, is spending time with friends, family, and other loved ones. That kind of brings her mental clarity and helps her at least reduce the burnout a little bit. Another one that I found to be pretty noteworthy was stepping away from dealing with just trauma victims. So this is beneficial to her because she gets to see new patients with different reasons for being in her office and different struggles, and that kind of can take her mind off people who've experienced trauma, which is really important because you don't want to overstimulate yourself or them. Some more points is prioritizing her own physical and mental health keeps her head level and reduces really any negativity or anxiety that she's feeling stemming from her work. Um, Keeping yourself healthy is really, really important because it has a major effect on the people that are around you. And so by employing these different strategies, she's able to avoid or at least reduce burnout, which ultimately helps her provide the best care that she can for her trauma victims, which they need and deserve. And she wanted me to say that despite sometimes feeling burnt out, um, or that her care isn't really working, she does a really good job of realizing why she does what she does. And at the end of the day, she does what she loves what does. And it's not about necessarily the difficulties that she faces, but rather the positive impact that she has on her patients. So a general overview of what I covered today in this little project here. Um, Joey really enjoys being able to assist trauma victims and employing different tactics, exercises, and giving advice, or sometimes even just being a friendly face. Just giving someone a smile can really go a long way. And it's important for her to understand the battles that these people go through on a day-to-day basis, based off the trauma that they experience. So really maintaining that positive demeanor is really important for her. And I know she takes a lot of pride in that. So her occupation has taught her that even if a traumatized person seems distant or hesitant, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to get better or that they don't want to be involved. Um, it's kind of the condition of their brain that makes them seem or feel isolated, even if the desire to kind of get out of their cave is there. It can be a little bit hard, so they need the extra push or extra advice. So she has a really good understanding of how trauma works, and because of that, she actually has a couple of friends who have experienced trauma in their developmental stages, and she's able to maintain a stronger connection with them and understands how they operate and what they need and why they behave the way that they do. So that's a really good thing. And she's able to assist her friends and also just kind of let them live in peace, which is really nice. And so she really enjoys understanding the impact of trauma on people, and she's good at working with people to help them accept their own trauma. And that can kind of start to get them out of their shell, which begins their road to recovery, and that's very important. So despite all the challenges that she's presented to while working with these patients, she says that she's never doubted ever that she's doing what she wants to do, and seeing her patients recover is empowering and really inspiring. So with that being said, this is my interview presentation, and I appreciate your time. Thanks.